The door to the solicitor's office opened, and my husband walked in. I had not seen him in 11 months. 11 months since he had signed the license, spoken the vows in that freezing chapel with rain hammering the windows, and then looked at me, looked through me, as though I were a debt he had just settled. Mrs. Ashford, the solicitor rose. His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield. Edmund did not look at me. He crossed the room as though I were a piece of furniture, pulled out the chair beside mine, and sat. His jaw was set like marble. His gloves were immaculate. He smelled of cedar and cold air, and my traitorous heart lurched so violently I pressed my hand flat against my ribs to keep it still. "Mr. Penworth," he said, "I trust we can be brief." Brief. As though this, the annulment, were an errand squeezed between appointments. I stared at the side of his face, the sharp line of his cheekbone, the dark hair curling behind his ear where his valet had not tamed it, the tiny muscle jumping at the hinge of his jaw. He still would not look at me. "Your Grace," Mr. Penworth began, adjusting his spectacles, "I'm afraid the matter is not as straightforward as your letter suggested. There are complications." "What complications?" Edmund's voice was clipped, controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to issuing orders and receiving compliance. Mr. Penworth cleared his throat. "The marriage was performed by license, before witnesses, and consummated—" "It was not," I said sharply. Both men turned to me. Edmund's eyes met mine for the first time in nearly a year, and the impact of it stole the breath from my lungs. Those eyes, grey as winter sea, rimmed with lashes too dark for his fair skin, held something I could not name. Not hatred, not indifference. Something worse. Something that looked, for one unguarded instant, like anguish. Then it was gone. "The marriage," I repeated, my voice steadier than my hands, "was not consummated." Mr. Penworth coloured. "Be that as it may, Mrs. Ashford, forgive me, Your Grace. The legal standing of the union is—" "Find a way," Edmund said quietly. "That is what I am paying you for." He stood. He was leaving. 11 months of silence, and he was going to walk out of this room in under 4 minutes. "You owe me an explanation." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. They hung in the air like a pistol shot. Edmund stopped. His hand was on the back of the chair, and I watched his knuckles whiten. "I owe you nothing," he said, still facing the door. "I gave you my name. I gave you my protection. That was the arrangement." The arrangement? I stood, and my chair scraped against the floor. "You married me in secret, installed me in a house in Hertfordshire like a parcel you wished to forget, and vanished. No letter, no word, no explanation for why you—" My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. No explanation for any of it. He turned then, slowly, and the look on his face, God help me, was so raw, so barely contained, that I took a step backward. "You want an explanation," he said, low. "Very well. I married you because your uncle was going to sell you to Lord Margrave, a man who buried 2 wives before their 30th year and keeps a house in Cheapside for purposes I will not describe in your hearing." He drew a breath. "I married you because it was the only legal mechanism that would remove you from his guardianship before the contract was signed. And I stayed away." His voice fractured. He caught it, rebuilt it. "I stayed away because that was the only way to keep you safe." The room tilted. "Safe," I whispered. From whom? Edmund looked at me, and for one terrible moment I thought he would tell me. I saw it rise behind his eyes, the truth, heavy and dark and desperate to surface. Then Mr. Penworth coughed, and Edmund's expression shuttered like a house before a storm. From everyone, he said, and left. Now, I know what you're thinking. Safe from everyone? What does that mean? Who was he protecting her from? And why did it require a year of absolute silence? We'll get there. But first, I need to take you back to the beginning. My name, my real name, the one I carried before Edmund Ashford rewrote my life in a single afternoon, was Clara Whitmore. My father had been a country rector in Dorset, a man of gentle mind and modest living, who died when I was 17 and left me to the care of his brother, my Uncle Silas. Uncle Silas was not cruel in the way of villains in novels. He did not lock me in rooms or strike me. He was cruel in the way of men who see women as currency, assets to be leveraged, debts to be settled. When his investments in a textile mill collapsed, he began accepting callers on my behalf. I was not consulted. I was informed. Lord Margrave came to dinner on a Tuesday in March. He was 53, heavy-jowled, with hands like raw mutton, and a laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand. He looked at me the way a man looks at a horse he intends to purchase. By Thursday, the settlement was being drawn. I did not know Edmund then. I knew of him. Everyone in society knew of the Duke of Thornfield. Young for a duke, barely 30, reclusive since the death of his mother, possessed of a fortune that made him the target of every matchmaking mamma in London, and a coldness that defeated them all. The gossip columns called him the Ice Duke. What I did not know, what I would not learn until much later, was that Edmund had been a friend of my father's. Years ago, before his elevation, when he was still Lord Edmund Ashford, second son with no expectation of inheriting, he had studied under my father at Oxford. My father had been his tutor, then his confidant, and then, in the way of men who find in each other an uncommon meeting of minds, his friend. My father had written to him, a letter I never saw, sent in the last weeks of his illness, asking Edmund to watch over me should anything happen. Edmund had received that letter, and he had kept it. He came to Uncle Silas's house on a Friday evening, unannounced. I was in the small parlour, mending a hem, when the maid came in, white-faced and stammering. "There is a duke, miss, in the hall. He is asking for your uncle." I set down my needlework. My pulse began to beat very fast, though I could not have said why. I heard them in the study, voices low at first, then rising. My uncle's voice, pitched high with the false deference he used with anyone who might be useful. Then silence. Then my uncle's voice again, but different, thin and frightened. The study door opened. Edmund emerged into the corridor. He was taller than I had imagined. Dark-haired, sharp-featured, with the kind of face that looked as though it had been designed for severity, and only occasionally, reluctantly, permitted something gentler. His eyes found me in the parlour doorway, and he stopped. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was quiet, careful, as though he was speaking to something that might bolt. "My name is Ashford. I was a friend of your father's." "I know who you are, Your Grace." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Your uncle has agreed to dissolve the arrangement with Lord Margrave." My heart hammered. "How?" "I made him an offer he found persuasive. I would learn later that persuasive meant Edmund had paid off my uncle's debts in their entirety, over £4,000, and had also, with quiet precision, mentioned that Lord Margrave's establishment in Cheapside was known to certain members of Parliament who were pressing for reform. However, Edmund clasped his hands behind his back. His posture was rigid, military almost. The dissolution of one arrangement does not prevent another. Your uncle retains guardianship. He will sell your hand again the moment the money runs out. He said this without rancor, as though describing the weather. There is one legal remedy that removes you permanently from his authority. I understood before he finished speaking. The blood drained from my face so quickly I gripped the doorframe. You cannot be serious. I am rarely otherwise. The faintest ghost of something, not quite humor but its distant cousin, crossed his features. I am proposing a marriage of protection, Miss Whitmore. In name, nothing more. You do not know me. I knew your father. He asked me to ensure your safety. I failed to act quickly enough, and for that I am sorry. But I am acting now. Your Grace, this is madness. You are a duke. You cannot simply... I can do precisely as I wish. That is rather the point of being a duke. He paused, and for the first time, the control slipped. His gaze dropped to the floor. The ceremony would be private, a special license, 2 witnesses, no announcement. You would be installed at Briarwood, my estate in Hertfordshire. You would want for nothing, and he hesitated. I would trouble you as little as possible. I should have refused. Any sensible woman would have. But I was not in a position to be sensible. I was in a position to be sold. Why? I asked. Why would you do this? He looked at me again, that grey gaze, steady and unreadable. Because your father was the only person in my life who ever treated me as a man rather than a title. And because I gave him my word. We were married 3 days later, in a chapel outside London, with rain on the windows and 2 servants as witnesses. I wore a dress of pale blue muslin that I had pressed myself because I could not bring myself to be married in something wrinkled. Edmund wore black. He spoke his vows in a low, clear voice, and when the vicar told him he might kiss his bride, he took my hand instead, briefly, formally, and released it. He did not smile. The carriage to Hertfordshire was waiting outside. He handed me in, and I thought he would follow. He did not. Mrs. Ashford, he said, standing in the rain. Water ran down his face, and he did not seem to notice. You will be safe now. I give you my word. The door closed. The carriage moved. And I did not see him again. But here's what made that silence unbearable. It wasn't just absence. It was the things he left behind. Briarwood was beautiful. That was the cruelest part. A golden stone manor set in rolling parkland, with a library that stretched the length of the east wing, and gardens that tumbled down to a lake. The servants were kind. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, treated me with a warmth that suggested Edmund had given specific instructions regarding my comfort. There were fresh flowers in my rooms every week. Books appeared on the library table. Volumes of poetry, natural history, novels, that seemed chosen with uncanny knowledge of my tastes. My father's tastes, I realized. Edmund had known my father's mind, and he was guessing at mine through the echo. He guessed well. Devastatingly well. But he never came, and he never wrote. I wrote to him, 3 letters in the first month, polite and tentative, thanking him for his generosity. unanswered. A fourth letter, bolder, asking plainly why he would not write. Unanswered. A fifth, angry, demanding to know if I had done something to offend him. Silence. The silence hardened around my heart like ice on a pond. I stopped writing. I stopped expecting. I stopped, or tried to stop, lying awake at night remembering the way he had looked at me in the parlor doorway, as though he had recognized something in my face that startled him. I told myself he was cold, that the gossip columns were right, that he had married me out of obligation to a dead man and felt nothing beyond the satisfaction of a promise kept. I told myself I did not care. I was lying. And then, 11 months later, Mr. Penworth's letter arrived. The Duke of Thornfield wished to discuss the dissolution of their marriage. The 14th of November, my father's birthday. I did not know if Edmund remembered this. I suspected he did. So there I was, standing in the November wind outside the solicitor's office, watching Edmund's carriage disappear into the grey London streets, shaking with a fury so immense it felt tectonic. Safe from everyone, he had said. I was going to find out what that meant. And then I was going to make him look me in the eye and say it again. Now, most women in my position would have gone home, accepted the silence, signed whatever papers needed signing. But I had one ally in London, and she was not the kind of woman who accepted anything quietly. Lady Phoebe Ellersby was my father's goddaughter, a woman of considerable intelligence, modest fortune, and the sharpest tongue in the home counties. She had married well, Sir George Ellersby, a cheerful baronet who adored her and wisely stayed out of her way. "You look terrible," Phoebe said when I appeared on her doorstep. "Come in. I have chocolate." Over chocolate and toast in her morning room, I told her everything. Phoebe listened without interruption, which meant she was either deeply sympathetic or deeply furious. With Phoebe, these were often the same thing. "He married you to save you from Margrave," she said slowly. "He installed you at Briarwood with every comfort. He chose books for you. And then he vanished and is now seeking an annulment." "Yes." "Clara," she set down her cup, "that is not the behavior of a man who feels nothing. It is the behavior of a man honoring a debt. It is the behavior of a man who is terrified." I stared at her. And this is where everything I thought I knew about Edmund Ashford, every assumption, every bitter conclusion I had drawn over 11 months of silence, shattered completely. "Thornfield has been the subject of some rather ugly talk this past year," Phoebe continued carefully. "His cousin, Lord Alistair Vane, has been making inquiries about the estate, about the succession, about any secret attachments the Duke might have formed." My blood went cold. Vane is looking for me. Vane is looking for leverage. If Thornfield married without the knowledge of the trustees, without settlement, without announcement, well, there are those who would argue the Duke is mentally unfit, that the title should pass to the next male heir. Which is Vane. Which is Vane, who owes £40,000 to various creditors and has the moral constitution of a rat in a granary. Phoebe leaned forward. "Clara, your husband did not stay away because he hates you. He stayed away because every time someone connects him to you, Vane gets closer to taking everything." The room swayed. I gripped the arm of my chair. The books, the flowers, the silence. Not indifference. Protection. He had been protecting me by making the world believe I did not exist. And the annulment, dissolving the marriage before Vane could discover it and use it to declare Edmund incompetent. Sacrificing the one legal bond between us to keep me safe and himself in possession of the title he needed to maintain any power at all. He was going to erase me, to save me. "No," I said. Phoebe raised an eyebrow. "No, I will not be erased, and I will not allow Vane to win." "Darling," Phoebe smiled. It was the smile she wore before doing something magnificently reckless. "I was hoping you would say that." And what Clara did next? It was the last thing Edmund, or Vane, ever expected. The Eastbridge Ball was the final grand event of the little season, hosted by the Marchioness of Eastbridge, a woman whose guest list was more carefully curated than the royal collection. Every person of consequence would be there, including the Duke of Thornfield. Phoebe secured my invitation through channels I thought it best not to examine too closely. She also procured a gown, deep emerald silk, cut in the latest fashion, with a neckline that was precisely correct and absolutely devastating. When I looked at myself in the glass, I did not recognize the woman looking back. She looked like someone who belonged. "If Vane is at this ball," I said, pulling on my gloves with hands that trembled, "he will see me." "That," said Phoebe, "is rather the point." The ballroom at Eastbridge House blazed with 1,000 candles reflected in gilt mirrors and polished marble. The heat was immense. The scent of hothouse flowers mixed with perfume and warm wax. I stood at the top of the stairs, and for one terrible moment, I could not make my feet move. Then I saw him. Edmund stood near the far wall, half in shadow, speaking with a silver-haired gentleman. He wore black, as he always did, and the candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face and made them look almost cruel. He had not seen me. Not yet. Phoebe's hand found my elbow. "Breathe," she murmured, "and walk as though you own every floor you touch." I descended the staircase. I felt the moment the room began to notice. The subtle shift in conversation, the turning of heads, the ripple of whispers spreading outward like rings on water. "Who is she? Do you know her?" "She came with Lady Ellersby." Edmund looked up. The expression that crossed his face, I will carry it to my grave. Shock. Raw, unprocessed shock, followed by something so fierce and so swiftly suppressed that I might have imagined it if I had not been watching for exactly that reaction. He went white. Actually white, as though every drop of blood had fled his face. I held his gaze across the length of the ballroom. I did not smile. I did not look away. And then I turned, deliberately, and allowed Phoebe to introduce me to the Marchioness. He came to me within the hour. I was standing near the windows, holding a glass of champagne I had not tasted, when the air beside me changed, grew warmer, denser, charged with something that made the fine hairs on my arms rise. "What are you doing here?" His voice was barely audible above the music. He stood close enough that his sleeve nearly brushed my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the heat of him through the silk of my gown. "Attending a ball, Your Grace. I believe that is customary during the season." "Do not play games with me, Clara." Clara. My Christian name, spoken in that voice, in that tone, low and rough and cracked at the edges. It landed between us like a lit match dropped on dry paper. "You do not get to use my name," I said quietly. "You do not get to use my name and then annul me." His breath caught. I heard it, a small, sharp intake that he tried to cover by adjusting his cuff. When I glanced sideways, his hand was shaking. "You do not understand what you have done by coming here," he said. "Vane has eyes everywhere. If he connects you to me..." Then let him. Clara, let him. I turned to face him fully. We were too close. Far too close for propriety. Far too close for a public ballroom. And I did not care. I know about Vane. I know about the trustees. I know what you have been doing, and I know why. Something in his expression crumbled. Just for a moment, like watching a wall give way. Who told you? It does not matter. It matters to me. His voice dropped lower. Everything about you matters to me, and that is precisely the problem. Let me say that again, because this is the line that changed everything between them. Everything about you matters to me, and that is precisely the problem. The words hit me like a wave breaking over a seawall. I could not speak. I could not breathe. I stood there in the candlelight, with the music swirling around us, and my heart shattering and reassembling in a shape I did not recognize. Then stop trying to save me by destroying yourself, I whispered. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since that moment in the parlor, and his eyes were full of every word he had not written, every letter he had not sent, every night he had spent choosing silence, because he believed silence would keep me alive. May I have this dance? He said, and his voice broke on the last word. I took his hand. We danced. A waltz. Of course it was a waltz. The only dance that put us face to face, hand in hand, close enough to feel each other's breathing. His palm was warm through my glove. His other hand rested at my waist with a precision that spoke of immense restraint. We did not speak. We did not need to. Every turn, every step, every accidental brush of his fingers against the curve of my hip said what words had failed to say for 11 months. I am here. I see you. I have not stopped. The room watched. I felt their eyes. And I knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent a year learning to read silence, that Lord Alistair Vane was watching too. But what happened next, in that corridor, was the moment neither of them could take back. He found me in the corridor afterward. I had stepped away to catch my breath. The air in the hall was cooler, scented with beeswax and the faint drift of rain through an open window. You must leave London. Edmund's voice came from behind me. I turned. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the golden light of the ballroom, and his face was a study in barely controlled desperation. I will not. Clara, Vane saw us together. He will find out who you are. He will petition the Lord Chancellor. Will he? Discover that you married a woman by legal license, with proper witnesses, and have maintained her in comfort for nearly a year? That is not madness, Your Grace. That is marriage. It is a marriage that was meant to be invisible. His voice rose, echoing off the stone walls, and he caught himself, pressed his hand over his eyes. When he lowered it, the rawness in his expression made my chest ache. I have spent a year building a wall around you, he said hoarsely. A year making certain that no one could reach you through me. Do you understand what it cost me? He took a step closer. Do you have any idea what it was like to receive your letters and not answer them? To know you were at Briarwood, reading the books I chose because I could not stop myself from choosing them, and I could not come to you. I could not. His voice gave out. The silence in the corridor was enormous. Rain tapped against a distant window. The music from the ballroom seemed to come from another world entirely. You read my letters, I said. Every one. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the floor, his jaw working, his hands clenched at his sides. Every one, Clara. I have them still. In the drawer of my desk. I read them until the paper wore thin at the folds. Something inside me, something that had been frozen for 11 months, cracked open with a sound I could almost hear. I took one step toward him, then another. Edmund. He flinched at the sound of his name. Actually flinched, as though the word had struck him. "Do not," he whispered. "Please. If you come closer, I will not be able to." I stopped. We stood 3 feet apart in that cold corridor, close enough to touch, and neither of us moved. The air between us was a living thing, heavy and electric, and trembling with everything we had denied for a year. "You are trying to protect me," I said, "but you are killing us both." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were bright with something I had never seen there before. Something that looked, impossibly, like tears. "I know," he said. "I know." And then, footsteps. Sharp, purposeful, echoing from the far end of the corridor. We sprang apart like guilty children as Lord Alistair Vane rounded the corner. Vane was handsome in the way of men who have learned to use beauty as camouflage. Fair-haired, fine-featured, with a smile that never reached his pale blue eyes. He looked between us with the unhurried satisfaction of a cat discovering mice. "Cousin," he inclined his head to Edmund. "And this must be— Forgive me, I do not believe we have been introduced." The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. I felt Edmund go rigid beside me. "Lady Ellersby's guest," I said before Edmund could speak. "Miss Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore." Vane's gaze travelled over me with an intimacy that made my skin crawl. "How curious. I could have sworn I saw you dance with my cousin." "A waltz, no less. One might almost think you were well acquainted." "One might think a great many things," Edmund said, and his voice had changed, gone cold, gone ducal. The Ice Duke returned in full. Most of them would be the product of an idle mind with too much time and too little purpose. Vane's smile hardened. "I wonder," he said softly. "The trustees meet in December. There has been some concern about your judgment of late, Thornfield. Erratic behaviour, unexplained expenditures. A mysterious estate in Hertfordshire, maintained at considerable expense for an unnamed tenant." His eyes slid to me. "It would be such a shame if the Chancellor were to find reason to question your fitness." I felt the threat land, felt it hit Edmund like a blow he had been bracing for. "Good evening, Vane," Edmund said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. But there was something in the way he said it, something final and dangerous, that made Vane's smile flicker. Vane left. The sound of his retreating footsteps was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. Edmund turned to me. His face was carved from stone. "Now do you understand?" I understood, but I was not going to run. And what Clara did next is the reason this story ends the way it does. Phoebe and I worked with the focus of generals planning a campaign. If Vane intended to use the December trustees' meeting to challenge Edmund's fitness, we needed to ensure that the marriage, when revealed, appeared not as evidence of madness, but as evidence of honor. Phoebe deployed her network with surgical precision. A word here about the Duke's late friendship with the respected Reverend Whitmore. A carefully dropped anecdote there about Lord Margrave's unsavory reputation and the heroic intervention that had saved a young woman from a dreadful match. The stories spread through drawing rooms like fire through dry grass. Meanwhile, I did something Edmund would never have permitted. I called on the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield. Edmund's grandmother lived in a townhouse in Grosvenor Square, attended by 2 ancient servants and a parrot named Wellington. She was 81 years old, sharp as a blade, and had not spoken to her grandson in 2 years because, as she informed me within 5 minutes of my arrival, he was a stubborn, self-punishing fool with more pride than sense. "He married you," she said, fixing me with eyes that were the same grey as Edmund's. "In secret, without telling me." "Yes, Your Grace." "And he kept you hidden for a year?" "Yes." "And you are here now, uninvited, in my drawing room, preparing to fight for him?" I met her gaze. "Yes." The dowager studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. A real smile, warm and sharp and fierce. "Good," she said. "It is about time someone did." The trustees' meeting was held at Thornfield House on the 1st of December. Vane had assembled his evidence: the unexplained expenses, the secret property, the whispers of erratic behavior. He had 2 sympathetic trustees in his pocket and a solicitor who specialized in competency challenges. He had not anticipated me. I entered the room on the arm of the Dowager Duchess. The silence was seismic. 5 trustees sat around the table. Vane stood at the far end, his solicitor beside him. And Edmund sat at the head of the table, and when the door opened and he saw me, the look on his face was not shock this time. It was wonder. "Gentlemen," the Dowager Duchess said, in a voice that could have commanded armies, "I believe you have not yet been introduced to my grandson's wife, Her Grace, the Duchess of Thornfield." The room erupted. Vane's face went purple. His solicitor dropped his papers. The trustees turned to each other in a flurry of whispered exclamations. "This is outrageous," Vane sputtered. "This proves exactly what I have been arguing. A secret marriage to an unknown woman of no standing." "Miss Clara Whitmore," the Dowager continued, serene as a warship. "Daughter of the late Reverend James Whitmore, scholar and fellow of Balliol College, Oxford. Goddaughter of Sir George and Lady Ellersby. A woman of impeccable character, whose hand was sought and saved by my grandson from a match with Lord Margrave, whose reputation is, I believe, known to everyone in this room." She paused. Let the silence do its work. "My grandson married for honor. He kept the marriage private to protect his wife from the precise sort of predatory scheming we are witnessing today." She turned her gaze on Vane, and it was like watching winter arrive. "If there is anyone in this room whose fitness should be questioned, Lord Vane, I suggest you begin with your own." I stepped forward. My knees were trembling, but my voice was clear. "I am the Duke's wife. I am here of my own will, by my own choice. I was not coerced. I was not deceived. I was protected by a man who sacrificed his own happiness to ensure mine, and I will not stand by while his honor is used as a weapon against him." I looked at Edmund. He was staring at me as though I had stepped out of a painting, as though I was something miraculous and impossible, and absolutely, terrifyingly real. "The marriage stands," said the eldest trustee, Sir Horace Pemberton, after a charged silence. "And I move that Lord Vane's petition be dismissed." The motion carried, 4-1. Vane left the room without speaking. His solicitor gathered his papers and followed. The door closed behind them with the sound of a lock turning on a cage. The trustees departed. The Dowager squeezed my hand, whispered, "Well done, child," and took her leave with a knowing look that suggested she had no intention of returning downstairs for at least an hour. We were alone. Edmund stood at the window, his back to me, his hands braced on the sill. The winter light fell across his shoulders. He did not move. "You called on my grandmother," he said. His voice was strange, thick. "She was delighted." "She would be. She has been waiting 20 years for someone to outmaneuver me. He paused. You outmaneuvered me, Clara. Someone had to. I took a breath. Edmund, turn around. He turned, and I saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, and his face was open in a way I had never seen. Every wall dismantled, every defense abandoned. He looked like a man who had been drowning and had just broken the surface. I had a plan, he said roughly. Annul the marriage. Remove the target from your back. Let Vane have nothing to use. It was a good plan. It was the only plan. It was a terrible plan. It assumed I would let you. Something that might have been a laugh escaped him. Yes, that was the flaw. Edmund. I crossed the room. I stopped in front of him. Close. Closer than the ballroom. Closer than the corridor. Close enough to see the pulse hammering in his throat. I have spent a year believing you hated me. I have spent a year in a beautiful house, surrounded by books you chose for me, and I have hated every one of them, because they proved you knew me and still would not come. I could not. I know. My voice shook. I know why. And I am telling you, it is over. Vane is finished. The trustees have ruled. There is no one left to protect me from. He looked at me. His hand rose, slowly, as though he expected me to disappear, and touched my face. His fingers were trembling. The Duke of Thornfield, whose voice could silence a room, whose authority was absolute, whose reputation was built on unshakable control. His hand was trembling against my cheek. I was so afraid, he whispered, every day, that he would find you, that I would lose you before I ever... He stopped. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone. His eyes searched my face with an intensity that felt like standing in full sun. Before you ever what? I whispered. Before I ever told you that I have been in love with you, since the moment you looked at me in your uncle's parlour and said, I know who you are, Your Grace, as though a duke were nothing particularly impressive. The words hung between us. The room was silent. The winter light was silver, and his hand was warm on my face, and I was crying. I was crying, and I did not care. Kiss me, I said. You ridiculous, noble, impossible man. Kiss me. He made a sound, half laugh, half something broken, and then his mouth was on mine, and the 11 months of silence collapsed into nothing. His kiss was not gentle. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding his breath for a year and had finally been permitted to exhale. His hands came to my face, my waist, the small of my back, pulling me against him as though he were trying to close every distance that had ever existed between us. I fisted my hands in his coat and kissed him back with a fury that matched his own. Every unanswered letter, every sleepless night, every moment I had believed myself unwanted poured into the press of my mouth against his. When we finally broke apart, his forehead resting against mine, both of us breathing hard, he laughed. A real laugh, low and warm and utterly unguarded. I sent the books, he said, slightly dazed. Did you like them? I hit him on the chest. Then I kissed him again. The aftermath was not simple. It never is. Vane, stripped of his avenue to the title, made one final, desperate play. An anonymous letter to the scandal sheets alleging that the Duke of Thornfield had married a penniless rector's daughter in secret and hidden her like a shameful mistake. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, every drawing room in London was ablaze. Edmund wanted to ignore it. I refused. On Thursday, we attended the opera. Together. In the Thornfield box. I wore the emerald gown again, and Edmund wore an expression that dared anyone in the theatre to say a single word. The Dowager Duchess sat between us, looking as though she had never enjoyed anything so thoroughly in all her 81 years. The whispers were deafening. But something curious happened. Something Phoebe had predicted and Vane had not. The story, when told in full, was not a scandal. It was a romance. A duke who had married to save a woman from ruin. A year of secret sacrifice. A wife who had refused to be erased. By the end of the week, the scandal sheets had reversed course entirely. The Duke of Thornfield was not mad. He was devoted. And his Duchess, the rector's daughter, the woman who had stood before the trustees and claimed her own place, was the most interesting woman in London. Vane left for the continent in January. His debts followed him. 6 months later, a June evening. The gardens at Briarwood, golden in the late sun. I sat on the stone bench by the lake, reading. Not one of Edmund's chosen books this time, but a volume I had selected myself, from the library we now shared. The lavender was in bloom. Somewhere inside the house, Mrs. Dalton was arguing cheerfully with the cook about the evening menu. Footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up. Edmund walked toward me across the lawn, his coat slung over one arm, his cravat loosened in a way that would have horrified his valet. He was smiling. Not the controlled, careful, ducal expression I had first known. A real smile. The one that reached his eyes and softened every sharp line of his face into something luminous. He sat beside me on the bench, took the book gently from my hands, set it aside. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his waistcoat and produced a folded letter. The paper was old, the ink faded, the creases worn nearly through. My father's handwriting. "This is the letter," Edmund said quietly. "The one he sent me. I have carried it for years. But it belongs to you." I unfolded it with shaking hands. My father's voice rose from the page, gentle, precise, beloved. "If you are reading this, my dear Edmund, then I have left this world, and left behind the thing I love most in it. My Clara. She is brave, and she is stubborn, and she will not thank you for your help. But she will deserve it. Watch over her. Not because she is weak. She is the strongest person I have ever known. But because everyone, even the strong, deserves to know they are not alone." I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. Edmund put his arm around me. He did not speak. He held me while the sun set over the lake, and the garden filled with the scent of lavender and warm grass. And I thought, this is what he was protecting. Not just my name or my safety. This. A life that feels like coming home. "I love you," I said, my voice muffled against his shirt. He pressed his lips to the top of my head. "I know," he murmured. "You have been extremely vocal about it. The servants are beginning to talk." I laughed, and the sound of it, free, full, entirely unrestrained, carried across the water and disappeared into the golden evening air. We stayed until the stars came out, his hand in mine, my head on his shoulder, the letter resting in my lap like a benediction. Some walls are built to keep the world out, and some walls, the ones built from fear and silence and love, too frightened to speak its name, are meant to be torn down. He married me to protect me, and then I fought my way back to him. And that, in the end, was the real vow.